One of the issues with bank erosions on the Shoalhaven River is that in the past, previous farming practices used to actually knock all the trees down on the riverbank because they wanted the cattle to graze on the river. But we've got other impacts today, particularly boating is a big issue as well. And the banks are so weakened because of previous farming practices and boating that when you have a flood, you end up getting severe erosion.
It's a little hard to tell here, but upstream we're coming from very high escarpments, and when it rains and it downpours, the water flows so quickly and accumulates so quickly into the river. The rivers do come up quite high. These areas where we're standing here today would have been covered in water a few weeks ago.
And now we found like Good Dog Creek, Tappertilly Creek, they used to flow at 1 metre per second. Now the creeks are now flowing at 7 metres per second. And so now they're getting lower and lower and wider. So 1 kilometre of one section of creek I've looked at 2 weeks ago, it would have lost 10,000 tonne of embankments in that one rain event.
Shoalhaven Landcare are here today with Riverwatch to put in some locally native plants such as Lomandra, which are a really nice clumping grass, or some rainforest species who put down some really good long deep roots to try and stabilise some of these banks and try and allow the banks to be more stable into the future, because the events that we will be having in terms of flooding and the increase in erosion is going to be quite prolific. You can see around the site that there is quite a lot of impact from erosion and when we get deluges of rain. There are a lot of different methods to be able to address erosion. Plants along our creek and riverbanks are extremely important to be able to hold in some of that sand in place. When we get large rain events, we do have large amounts of water coming down our rivers, which quite often will move sediments, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's really good to be able to keep some of those sediments in place. This area of the river does get quite a lot of water skiers and people in boats along the river. When they come through, they do create a lot of wave along the edge, and the plants are really important in baffling that and breaking that energy down so it's not hitting the bank and that we're losing more soil and sand. Down near the water's edge, you'll find a lot more smaller plants like grasses. Then as you come up the slope and as we build those organics from the sandy soil up to more organic material here, you start getting more established plants, shrubs and more larger trees. We have quite a lot of trees that are really important for bank stabilisation. And then as we go up the slope, you can see that vegetation community really prominent there with a whole range of different layers, including a really tall canopy with vines and shrubs and grasses and ground covers. So you get a little bit more complexity from the base going up into our vegetation.
What we've done today is we've got 2 sorts of planting. We've got succession trees, swamp mahoganies and casuarinas, and we're planting them along the whole riverbank. And they're the trees that grow here anyway, so it's leaning in and working with nature. But we're also doing some experimental work with Lomandra. There's been some very interesting work on the impact of Lomandra in stopping erosion in, fast flow flood events. And so we're planting it along a reprofiled bank, which was previously very eroded, and we had an excavator in to reprofile it so that it's a smooth slope. And we're planting Lomandra into that, and they're just the most amazing plants. I mean, really, you have a shocking flood, and after it, everything else is, and the Lomandra are there, perfect. So we're hoping that that'll really stabilise that bank.
Today we've got a range of species. This particular one is a red olive berry, but we have a mix of rainforest species that will be going along this slope here.
With Riverwatch have planted over 150,000 trees over the last 30 years on the Shoalhaven River. More than the other tree I've ever come across, which is great, is the casuarinas. They've probably have just got the massive root system, and you just naturally find them along creek systems, and when you do research you find that those trees can withstand more floods and more damage than any other trees. And if you get long stem casuarinas, long stems means you're actually putting the casuarina a metre into the ground, so you can kind of drill it at 45 degrees. Long stems have been really successful for us in the Tappertilly Creek, which is a tributary to the Shoalhaven River. Or we had the problems where we had a 3 metre vertical bank going into 2 metres of water. We couldn't stabilise the toe of the bank, but we kind of waded out there with a drill and drilled at 45 degrees below the water level and put the long stem casuarinas in, and it worked. It stabilised the bank. But you've got to have the right conditions, so you've got to not have any great big floods for the following 3 or 4 years, so it's all about timing.
We did extensive bank restoration work down at Number, which is on the eastern side of Nowra, and we really didn't have any funding, and the bank was eroded, and we decided we weren't going to do any sort of bank shaping and that. We were just going to plant mangroves, and it was a trial run. And it worked out that, one, the mangroves took really, really well. What happened is it just encouraged the build-up of silt, and then the build-up of the ecosystem, and not only it survived floods, and we're talking about over 1 kilometre of riverbank that we've done, not only has it survived floods, but we had a huge tornado that ripped through, came through the coast, went through the mangroves, and you wouldn't even know the mangroves were touched. We didn't have any mangroves that were uprooted. So once they establish themselves, they're a very, very tough plant.
They dissipate the energy of the wave action as well. Queensland University made a pearl up with mangroves at one end, and they created waves at the other end. And when it went through 3 metres of mangroves, there's basically no waves getting to the bank. I think it's also the manifold aerial roots that come up, so there's a lot of material sticking out the aerial roots of trees themselves that actually dissipates the energy of the water. We found now that we don't really have to do planting any more mangroves on the riverbanks, because the plants that were planted 25, 30 years ago are now producing tens of thousands of seeds. We found that mangroves produce like 3,000 tonne of litter per year per kilometre of riverbanks, and that all breaks down and produces nutrients for the soils. We're just trying to put it back to how it was. We've got 3,000 plants in our nursery down at the moment, and they'll be going out to other river systems up and down the whole coast, so we're trying to promote mangroves to re-establish other river systems.
There are a lot of different ways that we can protect our banks by putting logs in place. They're really important structures in our waterways. And a very innovative one here that we're working with Shoalhaven River Watch, who created the sand sausage, which in effect is a very, very long sausage of geofabric with sand in it that gets pegged to certain places in the bank, which provides stabilisation to the bank, as well as building up organics behind that to be able to start growing. The sand sausages here were put in a couple of years ago, and they've been a really important part of being able to hold that bank in place.
Our idea was to stabilise the toe of the bank where the waves crash onto the bank. If you can stabilise the toe of the bank, then you can plant the trees out above it. When I first got involved, the practice was to use sandbags, fill them up with sand. They weigh about 30 kilos, and it's very hard work for the volunteers to fill those bags up. And also a big flood would actually move them around, so they weren't that successful. So we developed this, what we call the Shoalhaven sand sausage, so it's a continuous sandbag. We would make a working bee of 3 hours. We would do 80 metres of sand sausage. We'd just sew the bag up with an electric sewing machine, and it wasn't a tedious operation like it was filling up sandbags, and it's worked really well. And that is a really cost-effective operation. The sand's on site, we've got free labour, and the geofabric wasn't that expensive. I know that council did some rock work down at Bowlong that cost $1,000 a lineal metre. I think our last cost was something like $30 a lineal metre, so it is a cost-effective way of doing it. But it is labour intensive. But we've got 20 volunteers turning up. That's a lot of fun.
Anyone can come along to join a Landcare working bee or working group. You don't need to have any sort of experience. There's lots of people around who can help, and it's just a really lovely space to work in when everyone's working together. Many hands. We get lots of work done when we're out, and it's a really nice place to work.